Hi everybody, it's Jackie Schomburg and I'm going to be doing some more grid journaling today. And I started out this video thinking I will do a wow. I'll do a review of a tool and figure out how to use this tool. And you'll see the tool in a minute. But it ended up that I didn't really use the tool all that much because I wasn't really thrilled with it. So this is just a regular grid journal page. Now the difference is that there's no collage here. So that's something different than I typically do. But I decided to keep this just paint and some Neocolor crayons, but mostly paint. So I cut down one of my business cards to size so that they would fit here easily. And we're off. So this is the tool. It's called a wipeout tool. I bought it on Amazon just to try it. It has some like silicone tips. One is kind of a chisel tip and one just comes to a point. Um, the chisel tip is a bit more flexible than the other side, but there's a decent amount of structure to it. Now, to be fair, I think this tool is supposed to be used with pottery um, right before the clay has been fired. It's obviously easier to use. However, I thought I'd give it a shot. So I used some China marker just to get those black marks down to give me something to react to. And I'm now using my color shaper to add some pyrrole red. Love pyrrole red. And I'm using some of the lines to inform where I want to put the red. Sometimes going around the line, sometimes I'm not. There's not a whole lot of rhyme and reason. It's just personal preference as you go. And I'm planning on this not to be a red piece. So I'm planning on most of this red being covered up, which is part of the reason I'm adding so much red. Because I want to make sure that even though I'm going to cover up most of this, that there will still be some red shining through. And again, when I was making this, I was expecting to use this tool to kind of carve through my future layers of paint to reveal the red below. Again, I'll show you how it worked or didn't work in a few minutes. But I love pyrrole red. I love adding red. I don't know why I love it so much, but I love it. And red tends to work best when there isn't a ton of it. So when you leave a little bit of red that pokes through from behind, or you add a little bit of red at the end, or you just do a piece with tons of red. I mean, really, I'm not going to argue with that either. So one bold color to the next. Now I'm adding a bunch of black. This is high flow carbon black from Golden. So it's very, very liquid. It just covers really easily. I do love my black Neocolor carbon black as well, but I didn't use that here. And putting the lines down first and using that mark making really helped me from a compositional standpoint because I wasn't planning my compositions, but when I did my mark making with the tool with the the China marker to begin with, it ended up really forming or informing what I wanted to do with my compositions. Because I am using some of these lines to go around and I'm choosing which lines I want to use. And I'm choosing when to ignore those lines. So even though I wasn't thinking a whole lot about the shapes as I was making them, they ended up really having a big impact on the art that I'm making and the compositions. I'm noticing that while I'm going through this, I'm literally looking around the page and deciding which one I want to work on next. Clearly, I'm not working in any kind of linear fashion. I'm laughing because I'm picturing my husband doing this, and he would just go like number one, number two, number three, all the way across, skip to the next line. And I just kind of going at a like a whack-a-mole style, which I stand by. So I'm using the tool here, and I use it to scrape away some of the black there, but you can barely see it. There's just a tiny bit of red that shows through. So it's not nearly as effective as my little wood sticks that I have from that, like my kids' paper scraping projects where you scrape the black off the paper and reveal the rainbow color below. I find those or knitting needles far more effective for this, but if you're looking for something subtle, you might like the wipeout tool. I think it was ultimately too subtle for me. And it could also be the type of paint I was using. Using this high flow paint might not be a fair, assessment of the tool because it does dry very fast. It's very thin. So I do a few more trials here. And you can see that the black I'm adding is a bit thinner now. I have been mixing it with water now at this point. So it's still showing up a little darker than it was in person, but you can still see there, right in the second column of the first row at the top, there's that rectangle in the bottom left-hand corner that is lighter because the black has been watered down a bit. So it's coming in more of a gray, a translucent gray, that when it goes over the red shows through. Over the white, it looks more gray. And that's just to vary the tone and the value. So I have lots of black, but I also have some light black, if you will. Already it's looking a bit less extreme, right? The all black, all red, all white is very stark, and adding that lighter value is making it look more sophisticated, but also a little less extreme. So this is Titan Green Pale, which is the celadon color that I like to use. Using this tool again. See, it worked much better here. I decided to keep using it to try to see if I could carve all of that away, and then regretted my decision. And then the paint dried too much, so then I just left it alone. And this is just using the back of the paintbrush, which works just as well. So I chose the celadon because it softens things so much. So covering up a lot of the red here, I like how red and celadon look together. It's definitely still a strong look, but it turns it into like a neutral color palette rather than, again, the extremes of the red and black. There's my head. Sorry about that. And it gives more character to the celadon to have the red showing through. So even when I'm painting over red, it looks different than when I'm painting over white because there's something there. It gives some history. And it gives me the opportunity to carve into it like that. But it just gives it more depth. There's just something back there. And this is me using the tool to carve that red away, or carve the celadon away to show the red. I didn't mind that, but I wanted it to be brighter, so then I used the wipe. So again, I don't mind the tool, it just seems like I have tools that already do that for me. So adding the celadon to cover up the red is already making a huge difference. Right now the black and red and white squares that are remaining without the celadon look very like rudimentary to me and very unrefined. Not that the celadon ones are finished and extremely elegant, but compared to the ones that have so much red and black, they do look more refined. The thing about the tool I think that drove me crazy was that if I changed my mind and didn't like the marks that I made and tried to use it again to carve off the rest of the paint layer, it was already drying, so it wouldn't carve that part off again. So then I still had to get a wipeout and wipe it off. For some reason, I expected that to be different. And you can see how all 18 mini paintings, as I continue to add the celadon, the page of all the paintings is looking better as a whole as well. They're still very cohesive. They all have the same colors in them. The shapes are pretty different across them. But as I'm adding the celadon, the red that still shows through really, really pops. Before it wasn't so much a pop when it was just the red and black. It was more of like a scream of red. And now it's like a focal point because I'm covering up so much of it. And so I'm just making decisions now on what to cover up, what to leave out. I'm still trying to play with that tool. I really wanted it to be magical. And maybe it would be magical if I hadn't already had, some of the scraping tools I already have. But it still had something different, so I'll still hang on to it. Because it does scrape differently than other things. So when I'm looking for contrast, it'll still come in handy. Plus, one art making session with a tool doesn't really give you a great, a full sample size here. All right, so now I have the celadon in all 18 squares. And I'm mixing now the celadon with a little bit of black, a little bit of red, and I think a little bit of yellow ochre. And a little bit of turquoise. It's a gray, but it's a complex gray. I wanted to get something that looked different enough from the celadon to make some sort of impact, but that would still tie together. And I like this. I like this color that I made. I didn't have very much of it, So you'll see that as I'm putting it on in several squares, I'm just kind of mashing my brush at some points, trying to get all the paint off. And then I added some water to try and stretch it. Which did work a bit. It was a bit of a, midway between the celadon and the gray. But when I watered it down, it was not as distinctive as it was when it was a pure color, undiluted. There are a few of these that I had no idea what to do, and this square that I'm working on now is one of them, that upper left corner. I really had fun with these. I hadn't done a non-collage series for a very long time. And it was fun to think of how many different marks I could make and composition choices I could make to make each of the 18 pictures look different but also related. Okay, now I've mixed up more of a turquoise. So this is turquoise, I believe, in the celadon. And some white. And some yellow ochre. I enjoyed using this color palette. It's very different. It's very muted aside from the red. Aside from the red, it's very muted compared to my normal colors. But of course the red is still there, so it still counts. Using my fingernail there just to get some of the paint off the edges that I didn't want it to be. And when I give myself kind of these, it's not really an assignment, but it's kind of an assignment to limit my palette. And what I'm doing here is I'm going through and I'm putting the same colors in all the squares, right? With the gray, I ran out of paint, so I didn't do it as much. But with that goal to keep all the colors consistent, it becomes more of a checklist than a critique of each square. So I'm like, do I have any of this turquoise in this square? No. Okay, where can I put it? So it takes some of the pressure off because I'm telling myself that, kind of like I have to add it in this square, so where should I add it? If there were squares that I really didn't know what to do or didn't really want to add it, then I would skip it. But if I just wasn't sure what to do, I wanted to keep it cohesive. So here's a lighter shade. This has way more white. I think it has a bit more of the celadon than the turquoise. Maybe a bit more yellow ochre. I can't remember exactly what proportions I used on which shades, but you can tell they're all very similar colors. And they all kind of go together because I'm using the same colors to mix all of them, just different proportions. Obviously, the red is the exception, but it's a strong, bold color palette because everything's neutral except the red. And now I'm adding some white. It felt strange having the celadon be the lightest color. And white really does add a nice, I don't know that it's a punch of color here, but it just adds something nice. And it also lets the celadon shine a bit more because now you can see that it's not super light. And again, looking to say, okay, I'm going to add white. Where should I add it? Where can I fit white in this square? It becomes more of an assignment so that I can check the box. I don't have to make a value judgment of, hey, do I like this in there? Should I have done that or not? Because all that is kind of pushed aside since I'm essentially telling myself, add white to all of these squares. I can go about achieving that without a whole lot of judgment. So if you can figure out how to tell yourself things like that, it may help you move through something without evaluating it too hard or being too hard on yourself in the midst of it. I really like those lines I made, by the way, in the upper left with that ruler. It's part of a yardstick that my children broke, so I just keep the 11-inch section for whatever I need it for. Going back with the China marker to extend some stripes. It's a bit hard to see in that square, but I already have some stripes that were carved into the black so you can see the red showing through. So I changed the red line to then extend it with a black line. Hard to see in this video. Just trust me. Spending a bit more time getting pickier here. Because I do have a good chunk of colors and layers down. Now I'm starting to edit a bit more carefully and be more thoughtful about what I'm putting where. And putting some finer lines in, quite frankly, just to give it more detail. Normally I stand at my desk when I make these videos, so I'm not used to my head showing up in them, which is kind of entertaining. Now I'm using this golden open paint for the white, which just means it takes a lot longer to dry. I did that because I don't have any non-open heavy body white paint right now. So obviously I'm going to use what I have. Also, I thought, well, it wouldn't be a bad idea to have something available that I can go in and scratch into whenever I want. So if I change my mind later, within this session, I'd still be able to scratch in or remove it if I wanted to. Now, I spent much of the weekend, this was a Saturday, I made this. I spent much of this day doing this. I probably spent 5 hours on this because I, every time um, my, uh, camera timed out, I was like, oh, I can do one more round. So I'd kept doing it in 45-minute increments. And I was just totally in it. So I have my Neocolor crayons, and I found a turquoise color that was similar. So it would fit in, but it was also distinct enough that it would be a new twist on the colors I was already using. And I love this color right up against red. It kind of makes the intersection of those two colors vibrate a bit because the colors are great complements. I was in the zone making these. It was really fun because they're such all 18 of these are such different compositions, such different shapes. The colors are similar, but they're in very different amounts in each square. Some hardly have any black, some are mostly black. So it was just really fun for me to play with these. It's so nice too with this grid journal to be able to sit down and make something in one sitting. And in this case, make 18 tiny somethings. It's just a really good feeling that comes from that. Maybe it's because, right, my other rest of my life is as a mom, which I feel like rarely do I ever make 18 of anything for a day that lasts, right? Washing dishes, feeding kids doesn't last very long before someone's hungry again and needs to eat and dirty some more dishes. And I wouldn't give that up for anything, but it's so nice to have something that I can make and then point back to and say, wow, I spent 5 hours totally in the zone, taking care of myself and my own, creative wellness, I'll call it. And I have these little souvenirs. Sometimes people will ask me what I do with these after my videos. And the answer is nothing. I'm going to keep these in my sketchbook. I'm using the Derwent ink tense sticks right now. They're water soluble, but then after they dry, they're permanent. Just using a kind of magenta color to give the red some variation. But these are so pleasing to look at. I don't mind that I'm not doing anything with them. They're just my little treasures. Right, and for any of you guys who are starting out, or not even starting out, who just work for yourselves and do your work in your sketchbooks and maybe no one ever sees them except you, you're no less of an artist because of that. All it takes to be an artist, as far as I'm concerned, is to want to create something and to pursue it and to experiment. See what tools you like, see what colors you like, try different things, see what works. And for abstract, especially, I find that playing is so much fun to see what happens if you add this color, or if you add this shape, or you take away this color. Here I'm adding this yellow-green color. Not 100% sold on adding that to the color palette in as large of a quantity as I did, but it's all right. But like I say, if you don't experiment, you don't find that out. So it's the curiosity and the creativity. If you've got those, you're an artist. It doesn't matter what anyone else says. It's funny, when I was still working my corporate job full time and just doing art, on the side, I never felt right calling myself an artist until one day I realized that I just had to do it. Right? I just had to say, hey, I'm an artist, because if I didn't say it, no one else was going to. And people would tell me that sometimes, like, oh my gosh, I like your painting, it's so cool. And I was like, yeah, something I do on the side. But that is what I wanted to do. So I made felt very brave at the time and very bold, but I just made myself business cards and I just wrote artist. And sometimes it just takes calling yourself what you want to be. That's way more than half the battle. I'm using a very small, fine-tipped Pitt pen here to make some very thin lines. Again, just for variety. It's very hard to see those marks in here. Hopefully in the close-ups that are coming, you'll be able to see the marks more. And this is almost done. I had so much fun making this. If you're thinking about doing a grid journal page, please do it. Kelly Wynn turned me on to this. I used to do these in a different way, but her way of kind of drawing all the squares on was really fun instead of just using the tape. I'm not sure why it made a difference, but it did. So thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider hitting the subscribe button. It helps me with the algorithm and to get more people to be able to see my art videos, which I greatly appreciate. Thank you all for watching. I totally appreciate your support and encouragement. If you make these, I would love to see them. I'd love to know how they go. Tell me everything. Write me a note in the comments. Have a great week, everyone.